That's what I'm
Twice
thinking.
would be good.
Must have a
Once would be best, and I would, like I say,
Tell me about your civil
I wouldn't care.
I need to write them down right away.
My
Place is dry.
well, maybe I'll show
It's your garage.
Okay.
In the wintertime, it ain't so dry because I drive in with a vehicle, you know.
Well, and your weatherproof
I mean, the
now.
floor's wet.
There's no heat yet.
Put some wood.
side of town.
Oh, good.
Room for wooden.
There's the really tracks.
Must be 6 bells.
I've been in your garage.
Amazing.
Oh, we got stuff like that.
Flop, if 6 o'clock.
Got stuff stacked there till.
I'm anxious to see the.
I mean, now I'm.
You know who you should,
Oh, George Quas?
Suppose I should make it a little louder, huh? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hutchinson Truth and Taxation meeting for December 5th, 2019.
All right. Mayor, Council, thanks. Members of the public, staff, thanks for coming tonight. This is the annual Truth and Taxation hearing. This is our public informational hearing on the 2020 tax levy and budget. Along with myself tonight, first off, my name is Matt Yannick. I'm the city administrator. I'll be doing the presentation tonight. I also have Andy Reed, the city's finance director, and Justin Jorgensen, the senior accountant here at the city to help me if I say something wrong or miss something. So I know we got a large crowd tonight, so there's 2 of you. That's better than some years, so we'll take it.
I'm leaving at 6:30.
I just missed your wonderful.
I figured, John, you were missing things, so.
I think what she's saying, Matt, is get to the good
Gets to the
stuff
point.
right
All
away.
right, so I'll be giving a presentation. If you do need to leave at 6:30 and you have a question, just feel free
I'll do
to
that.
interrupt me.
I got
That's
your card here.
that's fine. So the agenda for tonight, we'll be touching on kind of the budget process to date, just some general truth and taxation information. We'll take a look at how we compare, some metrics that we take a look at. I'll talk on property taxation 101. Then we'll jump into the tax levy and general fund budget, and we'll have a brief review of our enterprise funds, our capital improvement plan and debt management plan, and then kind of the conclusion and some next steps. So with that being said, thanks for coming tonight. The city council and staff have held 5 public work sessions over the past 7 months. The first session was held back on May 28th, and the last one is November 26th. This is technically our 6th public meeting regarding the proposed levy and budget for 2020. City Council adopted the preliminary budget and tax levy in September. The notices that you received in the mail were based off of that tax levy, which you should have received within the last month. So the purpose of this hearing tonight, this is mandated by the state, and it's our annual, public hearing to allow the public to provide us with input on the budget and the tax levy. So we'll be discussing obviously the budget, the proposed tax levy. We'll go over and we'll try to explain the increases or some of the increases or decreases, and then there'll be an opportunity for public comments and questions on the budget and tax levy. So as I note, tonight is a truth and taxation hearing. There'll be a continuation hearing if needed at our next regular council meeting, which is next Tuesday. And then the final budget and tax levy will be adopted, or is planned to be adopted at Thursday, December 19th meeting, which is our second meeting in December. Tax levies need to be certified to the county and the state by December 30th. So I'll jump into just some of our information. I always like to have this disclosure that the data source for most information that you see tonight is from the city of Hutchinson, unless noted in one of those slides. So tonight we're going to discuss the city share of your total 2020 proposed tax bill, not property values. And I always give that highlight because as we saw earlier, we already lost one person tonight because that's what he was here for. And this is my 19th year of doing this presentation, and all 19 years I lose at least 1 or 2 people because they come for the evaluation portion. So I at least like to highlight that, so if you don't want to be bored by my presentation over the next half hour to 45 minutes, you are free to leave. But with that being said, I do like to put a calendar up there that touches on kind of when some of those areas are that you can touch on. So really, the next opportunity to touch on your values will be this coming spring, most likely March, April, May, June period when you get your next notice of evaluation. We have what's called an open book session here in the city where those meetings are held at the county where you have the right to go and discuss your evaluation. But once again, that takes place in the spring. So what we're talking about strictly tonight is the proposed budget and tax levy. I do like to touch on valuations just to shed some light on that for those that do show up in regards to that. In Minnesota, the market value of property is determined by January 2nd of the year prior to the year in which taxes on that property are due. So to make it simplified, market values for taxes payable in 2020 were set in January of 2019, so earlier this year. And those values are based off of home sales from October of 2007 to September of 2018. Some of that plays into what the state mandates, but it's heavily based off of what the market does in regards to home sales, and that's the impact that it has on regards to values. So property owners will receive a new notice of market values from the assessor this upcoming March or April. Once again, questions on those evaluations should be addressed at the open book meeting, which is in May and June. And when you get your evaluation, it should state on there the time and location of when you can do that open book meeting. But one thing I do want to touch on is home values. If you do have questions on values, I've got just some information on what we've seen in values in town over the last 10 years, the median home values. Values do play an important role in how taxes get set, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But as you can see, specifically, especially since 2012, we've seen almost an $80,000 increase in the median home value. So I think those of us that are in the real estate or who are involved in the real estate market know how high houses are going for. That, to our record, is a historically high number. We've never seen that high of a number, but that's what the market is calling for. One thing I will note, the 183.5 is based off of the Minneapolis area realtors. That number likely will go down a little bit once you take into account short sales and foreclosure and some other aspects that don't get accounted for by the Realtor Association, but gets touched on at the county level. So that usually drops about $10,000 to $15,000. But still, with that being said, we've seen a significant increase in the median home sale price. So as we look to jump into the preliminary tax levy and budget, the levy that was set in September and the property tax effect that it had on the statement that you got in the mail showed a city tax increase of 3.1%. At that time, the preliminary budget was balanced. Since that time, through, I would say, hard work of the staff and the city council, we've gone back and taken a look at that budget, and we've revised many aspects of the budget. And so what we'll be discussing tonight is a budget that has a 2.1% tax levy increase. So since September, we've adjusted some of our revenue projections and expenses, and we've eliminated roughly $79,000 in taxes in the preliminary budget. And so the tax burden of the city is projected to be lower than the statement that most property owners received in September. So we'd like to spend a little bit of time just looking at, okay, how does Hutchinson compare to some of our neighbors and then some of the regional centers that we like to take a look at. And so I've got the most up-to-date numbers, and some of those will be 2019 and others will be 2018, and I'll make sure I highlight those. But in regards to municipal city property tax rates, and when we look at McLeod County, Hutchinson is the second lowest, has the second lowest tax rate in the county, with the lowest one being Biskie, and you can see kind of how we compare to the other cities within McLeod County. I've got the preliminary property tax rate that was based off of that 3.1% tax increase, and then what's proposed, that's 66.34%. And I'll get into what those numbers mean in regards to calculating your property taxes in a little bit here. So another thing that we'd like to do is, okay, we take a look at how do we rate and compare to the county, but then how do we rate and compare to outstate regional centers. We compare ourselves with 18 other regional centers in outstate Minnesota. The most up-to-date information I have is from 2018, and so to do a fair comparison with all the other regional centers. While we're on the low end in McLeod County when it comes to our, I guess, comparison to outstate regional centers, we're somewhat on the higher end and in the bottom quarter of those tax rates. And you can see kind of where we're at compared to the other 18 regional centers. I've also included what our 2019 rate was at and what our proposed rate for 2020 is. And so when you look at those regional centers that we compare ourselves to, this doesn't include like St. Cloud, Rochester, Mankato, or St. Cloud. We don't include those larger metropolitan areas. These are more of what's considered small rural regional centers. You know, some of these like Owatonna, Northfield, you might kind of question, but those actually, then that comes from the Minnesota Department of Revenue. So there's really 18 other cities that we like to compare ourselves with. Statewide, though, when you look at 2018, the average city's property tax rate was 73.55%. So we're slightly lower than what the state average is when it comes to the municipal property tax rate. A couple other metrics that we like to take a look at and make sure that we point out, because it does play into things like local government aid. When you look at those 19 regional centers of which we're a part of, we do have the lowest percentage of population below the poverty level, which is great. Obviously 6.7%, anything, in my opinion, points above 0% is a little too high, but in reality there is poverty out there, and we are at least on the lowest side of that in regards to regional centers. A lot of this is from 2017 census data, which is the most up-to-date information that I get. And so when you look at our median household income, we are the 4th highest of those regional centers, just under $56,000. And our median home value is the 7th highest as well. With all that being said, our LGA payment in 2019 was the 3rd lowest. While we're the 10th or 11th largest out of those 19, we're on the lower side in regards to the LGA. And some of that has to do because of a couple of those factors that I point out: the median household income, median home value, and even the poverty levels. You know, those are all great metrics, but it does impact the amount of state aid that we get, and so that's some of the give and take. Recently, the state released the preliminary property tax impact for the state of Minnesota, and the average city at the preliminary levies that were set in September are looking at a 7.5% property tax increase. That's just municipal government. When you include the counties, the townships, any of those other local governments, the average is about 5.2%. Once again, in comparison, we're looking at about a 2.1% property tax increase for 2020. I've got a graph up here, and this is something that it's within our policy documents when we look at establishing a property tax levy, and it's something that we monitor on a year-in, year-out basis. But we take a look at is how is our tax levy in comparison to the property tax base growth within the community. And so this is a look back at the past 10 years. And the one thing I'll note, the red line is our tax base, and then the total levy is that green line, and the blue line is our general fund. And so you can see the years where our value was on the lower end and was decreasing. We had our general fund levy was maintained at that 0%, with our total levy being just, I think, slightly in that 1 to 2% range. And as the tax base has grown, we've seen a somewhat slight increase in our tax base, but we've still maintained that tax base below the level of, or we retained our tax levy at a level below the growth in the tax base that we've had. And so that's resulted in those negative tax rates that you've seen in some of my previous slides. One of the things that we take a look at is the price of government, and the most recent data is from 2018, but we've gone back and tracked that since 2000. Both the state and federal government use this metric to measure, and essentially what that does is for every cent that an individual within the community is paying out, how much of that goes to government. In our case, how much of that goes to the city of Hutchinson. So we don't take into account payments you're making to the county or the state or the federal. And you've seen, at least since about 2010, 2011, we've decreased from about 3.6% or 3.6 cents for every $100 to down to about 2.8%. And so what that is, that takes into account all the city revenue that we collect. So it's not an exact science, but it's a good metric for us to weigh. And so it looks at taxes and fees that we are collecting, and uses a percentage of personal income. And so we take the personal income, the average personal income within the community, and we times that by our population. So that's the formula that's used. And so we've been tracking that going back to at least 2000. That's just a metric that we use to go, okay, how is the rate of what we're spending compared to the personal income growth within the community. Once again, that's just focused on the city of Hutchinson.
Just to clarify, that'd be like $2.80 for every
Every $100,
$100,
sorry.
right?
Yeah, I said 100, it's actually on the dollar, so.
Yeah,
so, my apologies, yes, you're
Yeah.
correct.
2.8 cents per.
Per
or
dollar.
Per dollar.
Per dollar, you're right. So, and then we've gone in, we've looked at some of, we've kind of identified 4 other regional centers that are a comparison to us. That's Alexandria, Brainerd, Fergus Falls, Marshall, and New Ulm. It's actually 5, my apologies. And with our, kind of our cost of government, that's that yellow line, we really kind of fall right in the middle of those 5 regional centers that are close to us. You can see places like Alexandria and Brainerd are on the low side at that kind of 1.6%. Fergus Falls is similar to us at 2.6%, and then Marshall and New Ulm are on the higher side at 4%, 2.8%. So that's just, like I said, when we're establishing, you know, both our tax levy and our budget, we're trying to recognize those, if you want to say, that we're in competition with when it comes to talent and to businesses, and we try to be mindful of that in the policy decisions that we make. So as we look at the budget, a couple of things I like to highlight every year, just because I think it's important that, yes, we're here to talk about the city budget and the city tax levy, but the League of Minnesota Cities came out with this several years ago that really highlights there's up to potentially 14 different reasons property taxes vary from year to year. And we've highlighted those on this slide. Obviously, being the city, that's what impacts us the most. You know, we don't have any impact from township budgets. But I do want to note that, you know, and we'll show some of these impacts, that it's not just what we do here at the city. It's a portion of what we do, but there's other factors that may play into, well, you know, why property taxes vary from year to year. And with that being said, Minnesota's property tax system, you've probably heard before, and it's somewhat true, it is a very complex system, one of the more complex systems in the United States. And so when we look at it, it's based off of 5 components. That's local property tax levies, that's one of the things that we're talking about here tonight, which create a local property tax rate. The property tax classification rate, so depending on the type of property you own, it gets put a classification rate, which is basically a multiplier. So I think your egg land is at the bottom at that 0 to 2.25%. Your average residential home is about 1%, with your commercial industrial at that 2%. And so Minnesota has a system that, if you want to say, punishes the commercial, industrial, or those that are revenue producing. That's the system that we have in place. They have a 2.0 multiplier, if you want to say, compared to that of a residential. Property value plays into it, tax credits, which is usually only certain properties, and then the state general tax, which is set by the state, and that's mainly assigned to commercial and industrial properties. So just something to keep in mind, that most of our commercial, industrial businesses in town are paying more taxes than our residential, and that's been designed by the state of Minnesota, not necessarily something that the council has done, but that's a part of the state's taxing system. And obviously that's something that we're mindful of when we are setting our tax levies, because that is the one thing that we do have control over. So I'm trying to keep this as high level as I can without getting too much in the weeds, but just to kind of help explain, okay, how do we come up with this property tax rate? There's a system that's assigned to it, and that's what we use, because that tax rate is what gets placed on every single property here in Hutchinson. So that's the biggest impact on one of the biggest impacts on how much property taxes you're paying. So that takes a look at our proposed tax levy and our total tax capacity, and that plays into some of those multipliers that I've talked about. And so you see that 7.45 million, that's the proposed tax levy for 2020, and the total tax capacity, that's the multiplier when you take into account the market value of the community and all those different tax classifications that are assigned to it, and that's how you come up with that 66.34%. And that's the proposed rate for 2020. And so, you know, we've obviously made some changes, so it's somewhat of a simple math if you wanted to go and try to figure out, okay, what is those changes going to impact? And we've just given an example here that 166,500, that's what we've used as the median home value based off of what we're anticipating that number to be. It could very well be higher. But most of your residential homes have a market tax exclusion. I'll touch on that a little bit, and then your class rate. So a home that's at 166.5 here in Hutchinson, the estimated city portion of that tax is going to be about $957 in 2020. What we've also been able to do is take that and use some of our neighboring communities and say if that same house was in this community or that community, what would that tax be? So the same house that's valued at 166.5 in Hutchinson, we've included up there Glencoe and Winstead, which are, I guess, the two closest cities to us in regards to tax rate, what that tax bill. So roughly you'd be paying about $100 more in Glencoe and about $75 more in Winstead for that same type of house. And so when we look at adopting a tax levy in a budget, we look at a couple different options, anything from a 0% tax levy increase. And so what's up on the board is kind of what that impact is going to look like on a house here in Hutchinson. And so what we've settled on for tonight is that 2% total levy increase. That's just the general fund. That doesn't include the EDA and HRA levies that I'll be talking about later. And that's where you can see that 66.39%. And so one thing I do want to point out, if you look at some of these bottom numbers here, and this gets back to home values increasing. If we had leaved our tax rate at 0, if we had not raised our tax levy this year, the average home at $166,500 still would have seen a $19 increase in their property taxes just because their value went up. And so that's when we talk about when you see that large increase in the value, that does have an impact on property taxes. With what we propose tonight, for the average home, like I said, once again, this is looking at a home that's valued at $166,500 with a 2% property tax increase, we're looking at about a $38 impact on a home here in Hutchinson. That's the city's, once again, the city's portion of the property tax. And this is just talking about the homestead exclusion. This was done in 2011. This was meant as kind of a property tax relief by the state. That repealed the market value homestead credit and then went with an exclusion. And basically what that means is that there's a portion of your home value that does not get taxed. And so when we talk about the exclusion, and we've got some scenarios up there, what those exclusions look like based off of the value. So if you do have a home, let's say it's valued at $144,000, you're only being taxed on that. You're only being taxed on $119,720 of that $144,000. That's the state program that's meant to bring relief to residential home properties. The one downside is that just simply gets spread out to the remaining tax base within the city, usually picked up by your commercial and industrial taxpayers. So once again, we talk about the tax rate set by the city. We talk about the home values. Those are two factors that play into your taxes. And then last is the market value. That plays into your tax capacity. So we've seen some significant gains in our market value over the last several years. We've actually had 7 straight years and an increase in our market value. 2018 was the first year that we went over the $1 billion mark. And this past year we saw another, I think it was a, 4.1 or 3.7% value increase. That was on top of a 7.7% increase the year before that. So over the last 5 years, our value within the community has increased on average about 4.4%. When you go back the last 10 years, that's shrunk a little bit to about 1.2%. So you can kind of see we've kind of come out of that recession area. In the last 5 years, we've really seen a significant growth in the property value within the community. So that's some of the background. Now we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of the tax levy and the general fund budget for 2020. I do always like to point out the city's mission statement because that does play into our budget. And I've shared this in the past. I believe the budget is one of the biggest policy decisions that the city council will make. And so as they're considering that policy decision, we always like to highlight our mission statement. And that's the city of Hutchinson exists so that residents, businesses, property owners, and visitors are provided with quality services and programs that support a safe, healthy, sustainable, and business-friendly community with a small town atmosphere for a cost of government similar to or less than comparable outstate Minnesota cities, and that's why we show some of those comparisons. So that's what goes into consideration when we're looking to adopt this budget and tax levy. And more specifically, we focus on 6 core areas. That's public safety, health and recreation, transportation, economic development, environment, and good government. So when we talk about trying to meet our mission statement, those are 6 specific areas that we're focusing on. Those are 6 areas that our budget touches on a year in and year out basis. So that being said, we'll take a look at the proposed tax levy for 2020. And that's broken up into what we call our city tax levy, and then we have other levies. That's the EDA and the HRA. And I note both of those because those levies are set by other boards, but ultimately city council has the final say on whether or not those tax levies get approved. And so we do like to at least note that. And this is a comparison of the 2019 tax levy compared to the 2020. We've showed the general fund. That includes a 2% increase within the proposed general fund. New for 2020 is a $45,000 increase for tax abatement. That's in relation to a business incentive the city gave, I believe, back in 2017 or 18 to Uponor. That was one of the tools that we used to help attract them and recruit them to come to Hutchinson. And so this is the first year. 2020 will be the first year of that tax abatement. And what that means is that the city collects those tax, and then we turn around and issue a check back to the company, and that's that $45,000 incentive. Our debt funds are not projected to increase in 2020, and then you'll see the 3.7% projected increase for the EDA and the HRA levy. And so when you include that 2% city tax levy increase with the EDA and HRA, the total tax impact that we have at least some control over within the city of Hutchinson is 2.1% for 2020.
What are the other 2 boards that you referenced that have an impact on that decision?
The EDA and the HRA.
Okay.
So the Economic Development Board and the Housing Redevelopment Authority.
Yep.
So economic development, their focus is on expanding the tax base, and then the housing, their focus is on providing quality, affordable housing within the community. I do always like to highlight that we do have a debt management plan, and that's the outstanding debt that's out there. That's the $2.2 million you see on the column under the 2020 debt levy. So when you look at the debt levy and special assessments, that helps to pay off future debt of the city. State law requires us to have a balance of about 105%. I think currently we're like about 116%. So between the levies and the special assessments, we have the funds available to make sure we meet our debt obligations to the foreseeable future. The graph up here just provides kind of a history on our tax levy over the last 10 years. So over the past 10 years, we've seen an average property tax increase per year at about 2% is our average. And so just for comparisons, in 2011, our total tax bill was about $6.7 million, and what we're looking at today is closer to $7.8 million. So you've seen just over $1 million increase in the tax levies. But like I said, percentage-wise, on average, it's been about a 2% increase over those last 10 years. And I'll touch on this in a little bit more detail, but obviously we're one faction of the impact of your property taxes, but we've also got the county, the school districts. They actually have an operating and a debt levy. We've noted the EDA, the HRA, and then Region 6, which is out of Wilmer. That's a regional planning. I think that's one of 8 in the state. They're responsible for their overall planning of the region that we're in, and they do have a minor tax levy that does get assessed on your property taxes. But I've done a comparison of what your tax bill will look like from 2019 to 2020. The city's share of that is actually shrinking from about 38 to 34%. And most of that is due to the recent bond referendum that was passed at the school. And so you can see where that pie is increasing. And also the county has proposed, at least at their preliminary levy, was an 8.9% increase. And so some of that has shifted, at least for percentage-wise, on the estimated tax bill. And so I guess the city's share of yours is going down for 2020. So just some additional information on the proposed tax levy for 2020. The levy includes the 5th straight year of an increase in the general fund portion of that levy since 2011. The proposed 2020 tax levy includes the 4th straight year of a 0% increase to the debt fund portion. And that's not expected to increase again until 2023. And those will be, I think, minor increases in that 1 to 2% range just in the debt. When we look back to 2011, the city's total tax levy has increased by about 18%. As I noted, we're looking at about a 2% annual. And the 2020 city tax levy accounts for per capita tax of about $523, which is up $8 from 2019's amount. So we've highlighted the property taxes. Now we're going to look at some of the other revenues that are used to meet the funds of the general, or to meet the obligations of the general fund. And just to highlight briefly what the general fund is, that pays for the day-to-day operations of the city. That's your police, your fire, your building inspections, your administration, your finance, your legal. All of that comes out of what we consider to be our general fund. You'll notice the 2.9% increase in the property taxes. Once again, about 1% of that is regarding the abatement, or actually it's about 0.9%. Other taxes, that includes things like our franchise fees for cable, and then our lodging tax. We've got a slight reduction in that, based off of what we've seen, and some of our projections are out from past years. License and permits, we have a slight reduction in that. We've had very good years in building permit revenue, and we're anticipating that eventually that is going to slow down. And so we factored that into some of the reductions of those projected permit fees. Intergovernmental revenue, that is the local government aid. And one of the benefits, I guess, of looking at next year, we did receive an LGA increase of just over $168,000. All of that has been allocated to the general fund. Charges for service, a slight reduction in that, and those are fees that you're going to pay for if you go to use the rec center or the aquatic center, or if you're using the DMV. So all those fees that we collect, that's what gets factored into the charges for service. Fines and forfeitures are what they are. That's what we collect from the courts. Miscellaneous revenue, that accounts for things like interest that we may collect on some of our funds that we have invested in. And then the transfer in that's the money that we collect from the liquor store, Creekside Compost. We have some minor transfers for water and sewer. The biggest transfer is the pilot payment that we get from Hutch Utilities. And that's, we're looking at about an increase of about $190,000 into that. And that will be year 3 of a 3-year phase, in where previously they were paying about 2.75% of their net revenue, net operating revenue, and that's moving up to 4.5%. In 2020 will be the last year of that increase.
Which is
It's about
the average,
It's about 1.9 million.
but that 4.5 is really the average of other
Of what?
municipal
Yep,
utilities. yeah,
correct.
so.
So Matt, question, intergovernmental revenue, you said that was LGA, but I thought our LGA payment was 2.4 million a year?
Yep, that's what it's gonna be, but there's about a million, about half of that, actually after this year, it's closer to half of that gets put into our capital
Okay.
improvements fund. So that goes to help pay for roads, bridges, streets, some of our buildings here. So we dedicate half of that into the general fund, the other half goes to the capital. So overall, we're looking at about a 2.5% increase in our revenue, projected revenue for 2020. Some additional facts, the general fund revenue includes a 2.9% tax levy increase, which is equivalent to about $149,000. Once again, of which $45,000 we dedicated to our tax abatement. Property taxes account for about roughly 39% of our total general fund revenue. Once again, the general fund includes an increase of the transfer from HUC in the amount of just over $192,000, and in LGA in the amount of over $168,000. So we have roughly about $350,000 of new revenue coming into the city, but we're also losing some revenue. Some of that's with a drug task force grant, that's been eliminated. like I said, we've adjusted downwards, building permit fees, and then the League of Minnesota Cities has changed some of their insurance premium, and that we're losing about $30,000 in that. On top of that, we used to, this was more of an internal financing mechanism. We were paying for some of our health insurance out of our, we have an outstanding fund, self-insurance fund, and that's getting close to being probably empty here in the next couple of years, so we've started to filter that out, and that was to the tune of $23,000. Otherwise, most of our other revenue sources are expected to remain relatively flat. And just to note that a 1% tax levy increase to the general fund is equivalent to just over $51,000. So we'll take a look at, okay, you've seen the revenue side of that. Okay, where is that money being spent? The biggest impact on the general fund, and I'll note this, it accounts for 68% of our expenses, is for our wages and benefits. That's, so you see the 3.3% increase in that for 2020. That includes a 7.5% increase in our health insurance rates, and then it also includes annual performance increases within that. And some of it, we do have some shifting and changing of duties and positions within the budget as well. Supplies are kind of what they are. That's office supplies, concessions, fuel, equipment. That's remained relatively flat along with services and charges. Service and charges are things like professional services. That's where we pay for our portion of Pioneer land, utilities, credit card fees, software licensing. A lot of that comes out of the service and charges. And so that's remained relatively flat as well. You'll notice the 4.3% increase in the miscellaneous expenses. That's the $45,000 payment to Uponor. And then the transfer outs, that's the city's share of the cost for the HATS facility. Those of you that maybe not are familiar with that, the HATS facility is the facility that's owned by the city, the county, and the state of Minnesota on Adams Street out by Creekside. That's a joint venue, and so that's our cost of helping to pay for those expenses. That 2.5% increase in revenue is matched by the 2.5% increase in expenses. And so how do to break it down a little bit more to where did that money get spent? Roughly 34% of it goes to public safety. Another 23% goes to culture and recreation, 25% goes to general government, and 15% goes to streets and highways. One thing to note with streets and highways, that does not include a lot of our capital costs. And we'll touch on that later. That comes out of a separate fund. But for, I guess, money, or for specific dollar amounts, public safety, it's about $4.6 million. General government's about $3.5 million. Streets and highways, about $2.1 million. And culture recreation is about $3.1 million is what we're spending. And those percentages have remained, for the most part, about the same, at least in the 5 years that I've been here. They might go up 1% or down 1%, depending on, but for the most part, that's remained fairly the same. So we'll take a look at kind of just a history of our expenses out of the general fund over the last 10 years. You can see where those numbers went down with the recession, and they've started to creep back up over the years. A couple things I'll note: from 2014 to 2015, there was an increase, and that was the hospital security that came on board. Now we get reimbursed from the hospital from that now, but you'll see those expenses. Another significant jump was from 16 to 17, and that was with the aquatic center that came on board. And so you had that whole new venture that came on board, and with revenues that go towards that. And then from 17 to 18, we had to do some shifting within our staffing in the DMV. We hired another police officer, and we hired another building inspector. And so those were some of those jumps in expenditures. So.
Thank you. I'm
Yep.
going to head out.
No problem. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.
No, it's been very helpful.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
So,
You're gonna
Thank
be
you.
tested on that.
I'm afraid of.
hey, ma'am,
Better go home and study, huh?
ma'am, you got your phone there. So,
Pardon? Oh, jeez, thank you.
some additional facts in the general fund budget. As noted, our wages and benefits are increasing by about $292,000 for 2020. Noted the $45,000 in additional expenses for the Uponor tax abatement. We've got some significant upgrades to software and licensing next year, and so you've seen an increase in that. Once again, wages and benefits, that's the largest expense within our general fund. That's at 68%, that's what it was last year. And then some just minor inflation, other miscellaneous costs make up the additional increases. But for the most part, outside of our wages and benefits, everything else has remained relatively flat. Once again, the general fund is balanced for 2020. Just take a quick look at our enterprise funds. We have included up there the projected revenues and expenses for the liquor, compost, refuge, water, sewer, and storm. I will say this, all of them are doing healthy. You'll notice a lot where you'll see the expenses are greater than the revenue. Well, that includes budget for depreciation and some capital equipment. So we don't budget for depreciation because that would simply just add more cash into but from an accounting standpoint, we need to note that, so. We budget for it.
But it doesn't affect cash flow.
Yes, I'm good. That's why you're here, so.
Thank you, Andy.
Help me in those areas. And so, as Andy noted, we've highlighted some of the cash flow within the various different enterprise funds. Those that you will notice that have a negative cash flow, most of that is for some significant capital improvements that we're making. So with both the compost and the refuse, that's with improvements up at Creekside, and then the water, that's some other capital. I think most of that's due to the Highway 15. Main Street, yeah. And then the stormwater, that's due to the second or last phase of the South Central project. But overall, those funds continue to remain healthy, and they continue to be an asset to the community. As I noted, Liquor Hutch is expected to contribute $500,000 next year, with Creekside contributing $110,000, so that's $610,000 that's going into our general fund. We have no budgeted increases in rates for garbage, water, and sewer rates. Garbage was last increased in 2008, and water and 7 were in 2011. Once again, enterprise funds continue to have healthy fund balances. There's a slight rate increase in the stormwater rates. So transfers from the general fund, transfers to the general fund, the enterprise funds will be at about $730,000 in 2020, and when you include the money that we get from HUC, that's closer to $2.6 million come from those various enterprise funds. When you take a look at the Liquor Hutch and Creekside, that's equivalent of about a 12% general fund tax levy increase or reduction in expenses elsewhere. And then enterprise funds account for roughly about 19% of the general fund revenue. So those transfers that get contributed to that. We are starting to see some additional capital needs as some of those buildings are starting to get older in age. So, it's a quick look at that. Take a look at our 5-year CIP. There's a copy of that on the table for the whole public that wants to take it and look at it. So, John, I made your copy just for you. So.
I'll take a couple.
So that's the 5-year plan. We're looking at just under $55 million, slightly higher than last year's. The one thing to note out in 2021, the significant jump there, that's for the police station. We moved that back to 2021. So, but otherwise, we're looking at about an average of about 10.99 million over those 5 years. And where does that go? So of that 55 million, we're looking at roughly 38 or 21 million go into infrastructure. That's our roads and pavement management plan. Another 29% are going to our enterprise funds. That's for improvements to Creekside, liquor store, water, sewer, wastewater, storm sewer. 20% is for public safety, about 11 million. Once again, the biggest impact is the new police station. Just under 3 million to public works. That's things like the airport, the cemetery, buildings, vehicles, equipment. That doesn't include infrastructure, streets. Then Park and Rec is about 4 million. That's for improvements to the rec center, civic arena, library, parks in general. And then just under 1% or just about 1% for general government. So that's where that 55 million is projected to be expensed over the next 5 years. And where that money is coming from to be paid for, about 18 million is in new debt. That includes, we do have a plan to borrow for the The police station, obviously, we'll be having a conversation early next year when it comes to how we're gonna pay for that. Another 17.27 million, roughly 31% comes from revenue collected out of our enterprise funds. So some of that water sewer bill that you're paying is going to help pay for some of those capital needs. Special assessments is 22% or just about 4.5 million. Those are direct costs that are being assigned to the adjacent property owners. And then we got about 3.39 million of state aid and federal grants that account for those costs, and the rest are just some of the special funds that we have set aside. More specifically, what does the 2020 portion look like? 4.5 million is going to infrastructure. Most of that is Trunk Highway 15, and then we noted our pavement management program. Another 2.33 million is for enterprise funds. That's Creekside and water, wastewater, sewer. We have factored in just over $1 million. That's probably our initial cost for, most of that's for the new police station, but we do have some radio and vehicle replacements. Park and Rec, we're looking at a new roof at the rec center along with a new Zamboni, and then some improvements to the airport and cemetery and some vehicles kind of round out the rest of those expenditures for 2020. And I've highlighted some of those on some of our major capital projects that are planned for next year. The biggest one that we're all aware of is the Main Street project. Like I said, we've talked about the first phase of the new police station, the South Central Drainage project, finishing that off, the rec center, and then I've noted some of the various streets that are planned for 2020.
Matt, does the police station automatically mean a tax increase?
No. And that's one of the tough discussions.
Oh, was that?
No.
All right.
And that's one of the tough discussions we're gonna have next year as a council. I mean, Andy and I'm not gonna promise it, but we've got a plan in place to where, you know, based off of a decision the council's gonna have to make, where we think we can build that and it will have a net zero effect on property taxes, or at the very least, a very minor one. Now, that's gonna take some tough discussions and some tough choices by the city council, but we believe there are options out there to make that possible.
So Matt, you're looking at bonding for it?
Potentially, yes.
And we're still at about, what, 2.5% interest rate?
Yep, that's what's really interested us.
Lower, yeah, that's better.
And we were about 1.8
Yeah.
this last
So,
year.
yeah.
Hopefully, 2 years from now, it's still lower.
You hope.
You know, that's some of what potentially will play into the decision that we make of when we finance that too, so. And then the projected debt tax levy, this is our debt management plan. Once again, that's at 2.6 million. We'll start to see some of those minor increases starting to occur in 2023. But one thing to note, that we've increased our project limit from 1.5 to 1.9 million. That happened in 2016, I believe that $400,000, I know it's a big discussion, that's basically gone into streets. So when we look at, you know, we've put, if you want to say new money over the last 4 years, it's about 1.6 million of new money that we put in the streets just from our debt plan. We know there's been more than that, but it's just something to keep in mind. When we increased that, that was specifically designated towards infrastructure improvements. And obviously, that potentially could look different based off of what in the future, based off of the police station, but that's something that's just to keep in mind. That hasn't been factored into that plan yet. So as we look at kind of wrapping this hearing up, once again, just wanted to highlight we're looking at a 2.5% increase in revenues and expenses from 19 to 20. Some of that will be paid by a 2% tax increase from the city. That includes the general tax levy and tax abatement and our debt tax levy. And when you factor in the 3.7% increase to the EDA and HRA tax levy, the total tax impact from the city of Hutchinson, things that we have a control over, is projected to be 2.1% in 2020. One of the things that I wanted to do is just take a snapshot look at 2020 taxes in Hutchinson, and I'll preface all that by saying this is strictly an estimate. So this was based off of the preliminary numbers set by the county, the school district. Obviously, we've adjusted ours and kind of what that portion of the tax levy is gonna be. Once again, our portion is expected to be about $37, $38, but a home value at about $166,000 is looking at a potential property tax increase of about $380. That's preliminary, that's estimate. The city's portion of that would be about $37, $38. So just to highlight that, the most of that additional tax increase is coming from other sources, whether that's the school district or the county, and we've highlighted some of those. Once again, I want to emphasize it's estimate at this time, so.
And with the school debt, does that include the new levy that just got
Yes.
passed? Yeah,
I
which,
received some data from the school just last week on that new levy.
right.
So that's our best estimate.
So levy is a decent estimate. The tax base might be a little sketchy. So
That's important to note, because I was looking at my form that I got, and that did not include that levy yet. It made a note
Correct.
on there that that would be added if they pass. So
Yep, correct. That most statements don't include that, so,
that's better up
yeah,
there.
and that's,
one thing before I forget, because it probably will, there's a tool on our website if residents want to see the impact on their taxes for the city only. There's a spreadsheet out there if you are interested. It's basically the same calculations Matt's showing you, but they can key in their own home data, home values, and see what the tax increase might be on your home. So that's out there on our website if anyone's interested.
that's a great, good point. So once again, as we kind of bring this to a conclusion, the biggest factor in a 2.1% increase, and this will probably be the biggest factor in the years to come, are the general wage and benefit increases. They're expected to cost us, roughly $292,000 for next year. Some secondary factors include the open tax abatement and then just some increase in our capital costs. And just a reminder that 1% levy increase is equivalent to just over $73,000. So kind of a last overview, if you want to say, of the proposed budget and tax levy for 2020. It does not include any significant increases or cuts in staffing or changes in service. As I noted, staffing costs and capital needs are the biggest driver of our budget. Fund balances continue to remain high, and the fiscal condition of the city is healthy. The state's budget forecast was released today, and that surplus has gone up. And so it was listed at $1.332 billion for the 2020-2021 biennium budget, and the reserve balance actually, I think, went up to about 2.3. So I note that to say we shouldn't have anything that comes down to us from the state that's going to impact anything that we need to do here within Hutchinson. We're continuing to see home values increase, and the city is continuing to see growth at all levels. The local economy is very healthy, and it continues to grow. And I noted this about a month ago at our kind of the state of the city. We've had over $150 million of new investment in the community over the last 3 years. We've had 87 new rental units built, with another 205 that are planned to be built in the next 1 to 3 years. Our unemployment rate's below 4% on average. This past month it was at 2.7%. And so we're continuing. We've had over 155 new homes built over the last 6 years. So we're averaging about 30 homes a year. So we're continuing to have good growth within the community. I would say it's manageable growth. It's not too crazy. But we all know that we live in a cyclical world, and that's eventually going to change. Hopefully it's maybe never in our lifetime, right? So I can put that hope out there. I don't know if that will be true, but obviously it's something to be mindful and to be thoughtful of. So,
Matt, when you talked about new homes, is there any way it's tracked as to what industry brings in, as to what maybe retirees are coming or moving to Hutchinson? Is there any comparison, any
it's tough. I mean, all I
statistics?
can say is that we're continuing to see more and more rental homes being built. Not homes, but rental units between the townhomes and so to tie that into a specific market, it's tough to you know, we've done some surveys on what they're looking for. And I would say two factors are playing into it. There's a reason why you're seeing apartments being built, because of the cost of construction. And also, we've had builders tell us they would build more homes if they had more labor. Those are two things that are impacting us. We've talked about this, the workforce and labor is the greatest need of this community. I know Miles, the last EDA, he just gave up an update on his business retention. And every business he went to said, I could hire 4 or 5 more people today if we had them. And so that's continues to be the biggest need of Hutchinson. There are plenty of jobs available, we just don't have the people to fill them. And so the cost of housing, I think, is impacting the amount of homes being built, but it's also driving some of that to the rental market that we're seeing being constructed. I don't have otherwise a good metric to really measure
Okay.
what those industries
Well, the
are.
reason I ask is because I had 2 citizens that have told me that people have come to their door and said, when you get ready to sell, here's my phone number, and we'd like to have.
And I think
you
that,
chat."
I think that dives back into the average cost to build a home. I mean, you can't build a home for under $230,000. And so most of the affordable homes are homes that are already existing.
I'm doing one for 160 right now.
Okay.
But it's happening.
Habitat.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk to anybody who's probably selling a home for under $200,000. I mean, we had a neighbor who put it up
It's
on
sold.
Monday, it was sold by Friday of that week. So that, like I said, that plays into some of that cost of the housing that we're seeing, so.
I know on the HRA board, we talk about that, and like you said, Matt, we're looking at building a house, but it come in at 225, I think. And, and most of the deal to answer some of your questions, the millennials don't want a house. They want to rent because they want to be able to move.
Oh, and they want
that's
experiences.
kind of what we've heard, when we went out and talked to people. That they're not looking to buy a house. And of course, then on the other side, we're getting a lot of older people that are moving in because of our shopping and our health care and all the amenities that Hutchinson provides. So, and that's why they're building
Well, that's why they're building like patio homes and townhomes and
Yep.
one-level living, because it's easy living. You know, there's not enough of that.
because
Are you gonna rehire them?
At this point, we're not,
No,
so just,
I thought that would make sense.
yeah, I mean, I think we were able to catch up from the years that we were behind, and so having 2 right now is a good number for us, so.
Matt, since Andy, put together some information on roadway spending, and that's been a question that's come up, can you share that information that he provided earlier? Just, it really helps show that we are making a
Yeah.
continued and increasing investment in our
Yep, and
roadways.
like I said, and that's the decision that we make as policymakers, is how much money are we gonna put into our roads? I know it's a constant thing that we hear about. Now, we've got plans in place, and some of that is for things like our debt management plan, so that doesn't get out of whack. But with that being said, in 2019, we're expected to end this year at spending about $7.3 million on roadway improvements and repairs. That's in 2019 alone. So $7.3 million is being invested into our roads and infrastructure. Now, once again, our highest general fund expenditure is public safety at $4.6 million. So you use that in comparison, we're almost double of what we're spending on public safety is going into our roadway system. And then you look back at 2018, we put about $6.5 million into our roads. In 2017, it was just under $5 million. In 2016, we were about $3.8 million. So you can see the increase. Now, some of that plays into that $400,000 of new money that we borrowed. And so on average, over the last 10 years, we've invested about $4.8 million a year into street maintenance improvements into it. So it's a significant amount of money, like I said. And I don't want to discourage the conversations about doing more, but those are just things we need to take into consideration. I think we're doing a significant amount. Now the question is, what's the healthy balance of doing that?
And with that's the mix of funding. It's the debt management plan and that 1.9 million that, we bond for that, but we also have some general fund dollars and, almost 400,000. We have some other maintenance funds that we put in there.
So
But
of this
then also-
7.3 million that we spent this year, about 2.9 million came from state aid and grants, which is about
Right.
39% of our funding.
That was the other
was
part
from-
of it, is some of this outside funding
Outside
that
funding, yeah.
staff is really good about trying to find grants and applying for that.
One thing too, we hear about this road and that road. That's why we have the capital improvement plan. It very well could be on that plan. And so, like I said, in some cases, we're planning to fix those roads. We just maybe haven't got there yet, so.
And staff does a real good job of going out and surveying roads too. I mean, they got the good plan going already.
Yeah, the one other thing I wanted to just quick point out is with enterprise funds, their contributions to the roadway improvements is huge too. When you talk about the sewer water funds and the local sales tax that's helping those two funds, without that local sales tax, we wouldn't have the cash cushion to contribute to these projects, which would mean we'd either have to bond more, increasing our debt, or do less projects. So that's another mechanism that's helping us, that local sales tax.
It's indirectly helping us.
Indirectly.
That's still 1.3 million a year though?
Oh, it's going up.
We're about 1.4.
Yeah, we're probably
Actually, about closer to-
1.5,
yeah,
almost close to
1.5,
1.6.
So you're still looking at it sunsetting in 2025?
2026.
How about heavy fleet? You're fine with?
Yeah, we invested more money into that. Last year, we contributed $50,000. And we were looking at kind of a new system. It still needs to be addressed, and I think there's avenues for us to do that in a manageable way, so.
So Matt, is the garbage deal, that's up this year?
Yep, then in October of next year is when our 5-year contract is up.
Okay, so that might figure into it too for cost of services, or?
Yeah, and that's something we'll have to have a conversation with probably halfway through this year, so.
Is there any other one that be coming up besides the garbage, or?
I don't think so.
I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah. That would affect it.
So from the public, any questions for myself or the council?
I want everybody to be able to go home, so I'm gonna shut up.
Got my dollars dancing
I
tonight,
just
so.
don't want you guys to be alone.
Mayor, council, any other questions? One thing, we will have an update, we'll have a follow-up to this at our council meeting on Tuesday. So if you have any questions that surface between now and then, there'll be another opportunity to discuss that.
And if the audience has questions, they can.
Then feel free to call me or email me. It's mjaunich@ci.mn. ci.hutchinson.mn.us.
You got everybody confused now.
Yeah, I know, sorry. Call city administration, so. I do want to thank both Justin and Andy, who, they do most of the background work and the backbone of the city's financial system. They do a great job. And so Andy's always out there investing the money. Him and Justin are working together to present this budget, so.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good job, guys.
Keep it up.
If you want a pat on the back,
Thank you,
I'll
City
be.
Council, for managing the budget well, because nobody ever says that to me.
If there's nothing else,